I'm going to be replacing the timing belt for an Acura MDX 2003. Since I'm replacing the timing belt, I might as well replace the water pump. And so I bought this Deco kit. Comes with the water pump, the timing belt, this hydraulic tensioner. Very important you replace this, and some of these other pulleys. I've never replaced it. The car has 189,000 miles on it. You're also going to need this special tool, and this is the serpentine belt. Might as well replace that. And at the same time, I'm going to replace the right motor mount. So also replacing that. One of the first things you're going to want to do is drain the radiator. So underneath there's a hole. This is the radiator drain plug. Simply turn it counterclockwise and make sure you have a bucket underneath to drain the radiator. While the radiator drain, I'm going to remove the engine cover, followed by this little smaller cover here. 10mm socket, 4. With a screwdriver, simply turn these counterclockwise. Undo the hose. Now that the tire is off, there's this panel that we need to kind of get out of the way. So there's a few of these with a screwdriver, just kind of pry it out. The bottom panel for this 2003 goes all the way to the other side. So the next thing that I like to do, because it's one of the most difficult parts before you start taking everything apart, is to loosen this. You need this special tool. So you need a 19mm socket with a breaker bar on one end. I've wedged it. It took a lot of force. I had to put the bar, and then I was able to break it loose. Now that it's loose, don't take it off. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the power steering reservoir. There's a little metal latch there, just push back and at the same time lift. Now that the reservoir is loose, this hose here, I want to get it out of the way. So I'm going to pinch it and pull this out. Some fluid will spill, so I'm going to put a rag. Now I like to add a little tape so it doesn't leak. With a 14mm socket, as you can see, I put the bar, and as I push, that releases the tension on the belt. So I pull the belt off a little bit there. Okay, now I'm going to loosen the tension on the bar. Now I'm going to remove the crank bolt. You're going to note that there's a little metal piece in there, so when I pull this out, make sure you don't lose the rings and you know the order of how things come out. And wiggle it. So just wiggle it so it comes out. And notice there's a notch there. And here's some of the parts. You don't want to lose this. And notice how it goes in. There's a little shaved part there. It goes in. I'm going to leave it for now. Okay. Now that the center bolt is loose, I got to remove this one here. So this whole part pulls out. And the next thing I'm going to do is start removing the cover. So I'll start removing these little bolts here on top and on the bottom. I'm going to move to the other side and remove that bolt and take this cable out of the groove. I count 17 bolts for the cover. Okay, now that the bottom cover is off, what you're going to want to do, and you can tell from my case my water pump is leaking. It's been compromised. Anyways, what you want to do is we want to line up now the settings, the synchronize everything. So there's a little dot right there, and make sure you keep all this stuff. We're going to put this crank bolt back on, and we're going to use the crank bolt as we tighten it to turn and make sure that we align all of the markings for the crank and the cam. So we'll do that. Next, with a socket, I'm going to turn it, and they should all turn. Remove this washer, and then make sure you align that little dot, the arrow. Okay, go ahead and align. See that mark, these marks there? And what I do at the same time is I mark the belt itself. You can see that I've added 2 white marks on the belt itself. So I know these little 2 notches where they should go. And do the same for the next one too. It's hard to get to this one, but you can see that it's also aligned. And again, I marked the belt. So on the bottom, you can see I added a couple of marks. A little more than a couple. I added some marks right there, and I marked the sprocket itself. I did 3 markings, and I purposely marked the belt. So the belt and the sprocket to mark it, and as well as it's aligned. Adding a little extra support, so I'm going to take the jack and just hold it up since I'm going to remove the right motor mount. To remove this engine mount, make sure to remove this bolt first. That's on the side, 17mm socket. After that, remove these 2. Now that the bolts are out, you can just lift this out. Now we've got to remove this engine mount. There's 2 bolts holding it, one on this side and one on the other side. After you remove the 2 bolts at the bottom, there is still one more, and that's at the top. You can see I put in an extension, and so you should be able to get to it right there. This piece comes out. There is another bolt, so I removed one, and then there's another one further down. So as you can see, there's the motor mount. There was one bolt. That's the second bolt on the bottom. In fact, it might be best to remove the top ones before you do the bottom ones. Okay, and you see these things, they tear up and they don't hold your engine as well, so it's always important to replace these. Use a 10mm wrench and remove this before you remove the big bolts. To remove this attachment, there's a bolt right here which I removed. There's one on the bottom, and there's one kind of hidden. There's a hole right there, and make sure you put in your 14mm. Just slide it out. So now you have the water pump exposed and the belt. This part of the cam has this tension, and this is gonna spin back. So just be aware of that. We'll have to compensate when we put the belt back. We'll have to take and move this forward to make sure that the sprockets align with all with the belt and the marks and everything. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is remove this little hydraulic tensioner. It's got 2 10mm. Now that the tensioner has been removed, it snapped back, and the belt is loose. So I'm gonna kind of work it out here, and I added a few little extra marks because it was hard to see. So what I like to do is mark the new belt right away and match the number of little notches and mark it exactly in the same place. So for example, I'm gonna mark the new belt to match the old belt. So I make sure that these notches line up exactly with the old one. So I go all around, and sometimes I even count just to make sure that I don't skip one. So at least for me, this is it's been foolproof, so I never have any issues. And you'll see when I show you how to put the timing belt back on, if these notches all line up, the timing is always perfect. Inspect to make sure there are no oil leaks. Sometimes there are oil leaks from the seals on the cam. If there are no leaks, I do not replace it, because if it's not broken, I don't fix it. So I'm going to remove the water pump. There are several bolts I got to remove. And when I remove it, usually the water does come out. So I'll have to make sure I plan ahead and put a tray at the bottom to catch that extra fluid that comes out of the water pump. And I need to remove this one right here. This is a bigger bolt that holds one of the pulleys. So that's it right here. After removing the other bolts, the water pump just came out. Okay. Also, optionally, I removed this just to look at the seal for the crankshaft. There's no oil leaks, so if you have an oil leak, this is where you want to make sure you replace that. Okay, make sure to clean everything. Since the timing belt's gonna go in here, it needs to be dry. Fluid did spill from the water pump, so I had to clean it all out. Now I'm gonna replace this little pulley here. So now I'm gonna get the water pump ready, now that everything's clean, before I put this little idle pulley. I'm gonna go ahead and use a little bit of True Blue on the, after I put on the gasket, just a little bit, and I'm also going to put it on the bolt so that it doesn't walk back once it's on. So that's what I'm gonna do. Make sure that the gasket goes in the right place, and then I'm gonna put these on. So for water pump bolts, 104, that's in inches, pounds, or you could do 12 Newton meters. That's the torque. Okay. The new water pump is in. Everything is clean. I'm gonna now put that little pulley, and there's the new one. You'll need to remove this piece. You should just stick your finger in here and pull this out, and you're simply going to put it into the other one. Here's the new one. So the bolt goes inside this way. Okay, so I put it in. This is gonna move. Make sure. The next thing to do is to put this hydraulic tensioner. There's 2 bolts, 10 millimeter. Do not pull the little grenade pin. Do not until after the timing belt is on. So it's in. See there, the 2 bolts, and the pin is still in. It's time to put the belt in. Make sure that all the marks line up. Looks good. So I'm starting with the bottom, and you can see I use these markings again, so they're perfect. So I know exactly that the belt's correct. This is the bottom. Alright, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the washer and the bolt so this doesn't slip out. That's what I'm going to do, and then move up. Okay, I'm going to put the washer Okay, you can see obviously from the notches that that's the back side. That goes right there. The pin goes with the carved part at towards the bottom, like that. Goes in there. If you put it in wrong, it won't go in all the way. It sticks up a little bit. That's not right. So you have to shave part down. And you can see that it goes all the way in. Alright. Now I'm going to put the crank bolt in. So on the top, I put the belt on, making sure you get as much slack as possible off. But you can see that the notches are off by 1 tick there. Right? That should be there instead of there. So sometimes I'll take this and I'll use a socket wrench to get the slack out. I'll go ahead and I'll bring it down a little bit, turn it just enough to, there you go, and then slide it in now to the proper spot. And then what I'll do is I'll tighten this, not tighten it, but rotate the crankshaft to the left to remove the slack, from the bottom to this top right crankshaft. So now this is tighter and it sits right on the right spot, and as you can see, it's aligned with the notch on the top. So now I'm gonna do the same to that one on the other side. So this on the back side cam, it tends to, there is some tension in it, and it springs forward this whole sprocket. So what I need to do is make sure I line those 2 lines with the 2 notches. So I'm gonna have to, so you can see here, I'm gonna pull this because it sprung forward, and until I kind of judge the 2 notches are, and then start pushing the belt in to match those 2 marks on the sprocket. So the 2 marks line up. These 2 marks line up, and we know the bottom lines up. I'm gonna have to now get it over that pulley. To get it over this pulley, simply try to get as much tension out of the thing, and so you want to go counterclockwise and turn, and as you turn, that takes up the slack, brings it forward, and then slip it in. So I'm gonna double check everything. Those 2 marks look perfect. These 2 marks also perfect. And yep, all these markings are right where they should be. So everything is perfect. All right. So what we can now do is pull that pin to get rid of any slack left. Pull the pin. The next thing I'm going to put on is the brace that covers the water pump. There's 2 long bolts that go on the top and 1 on the bottom. After putting this engine support on that goes over the water pump, the next thing I'm going to do is put on the cover. I'm actually going to start with the top left. It has takes 5 bolts, and I'm going to leave it loose, so when I put the bottom one, it needs to slip in on this end here. So I'm going to go counterclockwise, left crankshaft, bottom cover, and then upper right cover. So I put a couple bolts in. You can see it's very loose. That's what I want. I'm going to go put the bottom. So I slid in the cover right here to the top one, and I just put 1 bolt to hold it in. I'm going to put the top right. There are 5 bolts, and always make sure to put the mileage and the date the job is being done. Okay, now that the cover is on, the next step is to put this pulley. The pulley is now in. Cover is all tightened up. This is the right side motor mount. Put these little 2 rubber strips. There's little notches here. Put one on the right, put one on the left. We have 3 short screws. One goes on the top, back, the 2 bottom ones, and then this one will be for this extra support here. After the motor mount, before I forget, make sure you plug in the wire back in to this, push it in there. Also on this side, connect this back up. Okay, so everything's looking good. The next thing to do is for the motor mount, there's this other additional support. There's a little notch here and the bolt. This is the top. It's gonna go on top. Motor mount's ready to go. We're gonna attach this brace. Goes in here. Okay, you can see the holes need to line up, and then we're gonna put this screw, long screw here. The bolt is in. Make sure it's loose. It needs to be loose so that these holes can be lined up. All right, and then we'll tighten it all slowly all together. The bolts are tightened, as well as the long one that goes across. This little bushing is in place. This added support here is also in place. Pushing this cable into the attachment. Make sure that the washer is in and the metal pin, that it's flush with the outer edge here. Wiggle it a little bit. And now I'm going to put the bolt in. I've got 1 breaker bar on the bolt, the other on the tool, and you can see that I'm wedging it in between the axle. I'm now going to clockwise tighten that crankshaft bolt. The final step here is to put the serpentine belt in. I started at the bottom around the crankshaft wheel, but the final step is to put this over this wheel, but we'll have to take this pulley here, put a socket on it and push it this way so that we can put this in. So as you can see, I'm using that pulley. This bar pushes that pulley, allowing me to put the belt over this wheel. Time to connect the power steering hose back up. Okay, the power steering hose is now connected. The next thing I'm going to do is fill in the radiator. But before you add fluid, make sure that the radiator plug has been tightened. Okay, we put radiator fluid, put the cap on, and make sure there's nothing left behind, nothing in the way, because what I'm going to do next is start the engine, see if it works. Okay, I'm going to start the car. Alright, perfect. Okay, make sure to top off any fluids as it opens up and the fluid starts to flow. You're going to have to add more antifreeze. You need to put the lower cover back on. After you put the cover, put the engine cover, and that should do it. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on, and the wheel.